You've landed at the edge of what medicine has known and what it's becoming. I'm Dr. Richard Rocker, and this is the Integrative Continuum, a podcast bridging biology, energy, and human potential. In each episode, we explore how quantum biology, frequency medicine, and ancient healing systems are transforming our understanding of health. This is where mitochondria meet meaning and blood work meets bioenergetics. Subscribe now and join me on the frontier of integrative healing, where science and soul are no longer separate.
Welcome to the Integrative Continuum. I'm Dr. Richard Rocker. On this podcast, we explore health, performance, leadership, and longevity through a whole systems lens, integrating biology, psychology, environment, lived experience, and emerging science. I share what I understand to be true as I know it and as I continue to learn it. Today, I'm joined by Bronia Thomas, a marketing strategist, entrepreneur, and founder of Global Lab Expert Group. Bronia has spent over 25 years working with global brands across industries ranging from finance and technology to healthcare and government, helping organizations understand complex problems, connect meaningfully with people, and build solutions that actually work in the real world. In recent years, her work has taken a powerful turn into healthcare. In 2024, drawing from both professional expertise and personal experience, Bronia founded Global Lab Expert Group, a company focused on improving access to advanced diagnostic testing and connecting patients and practitioners with specialist support internationally. What started at a kitchen table has grown rapidly into a multi-country operation, supporting clinicians and individuals across Europe, the UK, North America, and beyond. A testament to both the need for this work and Bronia's ability to bridge business thinking with human-centered healthcare. Alongside this, Bronia lectures in business, digital marketing, and AI, speaks internationally on data, strategy, and the evolving customer experience, and was recently recognized with the UK Best Businesswomen Award for Best New Business. Today, we're going to explore her journey, the gaps she sees in modern healthcare systems, and how diagnostics, data, and leadership intersect when people are ready to take ownership of their health. Bronia, welcome to the Integrative Continuum podcast.
Dr. Rocker, I'm thrilled to join. Thank you very much for such a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. So Bronia, for listeners who may not know you yet, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to found Global Lab Expert Group?
Yeah, well, it's as sort of the intro kind of gave that sort of a much better summary than I probably will give now. But basically, I spent my career. I am originally from Vancouver, educated, raised, etc. there, and came over to the UK in 2000 to pursue, the semblance of a career and build that CV and have all those aspirations that we do when we're starting out. And fell into, by luck as much as persistence, into what we know loosely as the marketing advertising agency world. It's when you're having that classic conversation in a pub and somebody says, well, what do you do for a living? What it used to be is I make TV ads and all that kind of advertising comms. But it was much more than that, because my background involved a lot of psychology, economics, business, statistical analysis. There was a whole remit to what I had studied and had applied myself to in my early years. And so the element, although I fell into the world that we term marketing, it is very much the creatives, of which I am most definitely not, that form the logos and the ads and everything that you see on the as an output. When you turn on your TV and you flip through a magazine or you're on social media. Where I was at that business planning end, the bit where you sit with a client and you discuss, they have this much money, they've got this much budget, they've got these business challenges, they've got that product or service, a car, whatever it is that they're trying to sell, promote, push. And how do you communicate that to your audience? And what is that target audience? And how do they look like? And what comes into that which my university students would know as an acronym PESTLE, PESTLE, which is political, economic, social, technological, legal, and economic factors. And you have a look at all of that. And so I spent a career looking at that for brands, businesses, leaders. And how does that actually work? How does that translate? Yes, the end of it might be a sale or a communication, but at the heart of it, you're always trying to understand what's going on in the world. And so I did a career in that, and I had a fantastic time. And I got put on all sorts of airplanes and flown to different countries, managing different regions, doing that very thing for different brands. And then and then I got sick. That's the easiest and quickest way to say it is I got sick. I became unwell. I went through a series of diagnostics. Nothing was showing up, and quite clearly was something wrong. And I was originally told, because I now live in the UK. So I've had this travel and this experience and living in different countries, but I was very much under the UK healthcare system at the time, which I'm only using as an example, not judgment, because I think this applies to most countries these days. I kept hitting dead ends. And the dead ends led to the doctors basically scratching their chin and saying, you know what, you're that kind of age. You're probably perimenopausal. You might be on burnout, given what you've said. You've already admitted to the fact you've got a young child. That's probably it. But it's very interesting is, you see patients yourself regularly, and when you pick out those patterns of there's something more than just burnout. There's something going on here. And I just had a gut feel. We know our bodies best. We live in them every day. And I knew it was something beyond that. And so applying without realizing it, if I'm honest, but I think I fell so easily career-wise into that. What's the problem? What's the root of it? What's the business challenge, etc., that I just, without thinking, applied that to myself. I just became curious. What is it with me? What could it be? Goodness me, Dr. Google got a lot of searches over a few months. But it's interesting for those that do become curious about their health, of which I think there are more and more these days.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, it's a really growth trend, and I think partially we're becoming educated to that. Take health into your own hands, and partially it is systems that have let people down. And as I said, I'm citing because I'm in the UK, but I can tell you from the many patients that we deal with every day in countries all around the world, it's a common theme. That the healthcare systems are great up to a certain point, and beyond that, you need to look elsewhere. So I asked questions, and to sort of fast forward, because that's the background, basically, I ended up finding a wonderful doctor in London, originally from South Africa, so international himself, helped me answer the questions, put me into connections with treatment, and therefore began my healing journey. And it's been a long healing journey. We discovered what was wrong, but by the time we discovered it, again, as many patients find, is by then a whole other series of things that happened, which because it becomes a cascade effect when your body's sick, as you know. What starts as one problem, unless you resolve that quickly starts to affect other parts of your body and other systems. So it was a long journey to get well. And I use that in inverted commas because I think when you become chronically ill, as I became, there are certain things that never fully recover. And there's certain impacts that sort of have a long tail of recovery. So even today, I can say that every day I'm working on staying well, keeping well. But I function, and I function to probably the best I have in decades. And where that transition as to what am I doing nowadays, it became because the combination of the work I had done in my career, the personal experience I had, the people I met, the doctors, the nurses, the laboratories, all the medical care people, not just within the UK, but abroad, Germany, Portugal, elsewhere, Canada even. I became aware that what existed, and we'll get on. I know the next question will be, what exactly am I doing? But what I have created is a business that operates in that space, that I fell into. Because if we want to call it, I fell through a gap. And what's the gap? The gap is the doctors where you are can't answer. You don't know where to go next. You don't know which doctor to go to. You don't know which lab test to necessarily do. How on earth do you find out? GLXG is, in theory and in practice as we are developing, the answer to that. You come to us so that we can connect you to the doctor, the laboratory, or in some cases, the patient already has the results but needs the doctor. So it can work in multiple ways of finding the answer. Because really, unless you go through the same experience, and many do, I'm not the only one, many go through all those questions and do end up finding the right people, but it's a hard journey and not everybody does find the right answers, and so they fall through the cracks, and then they end up on, what's the end result if I hadn't found out what was wrong with me? The end result is I would have been given pills by the GP to manage the symptoms and told to, that's just how it is, Bronia.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then, so just to clarify, you're not a medical practitioner yet. You've worked very closely with laboratories and clinicians, and so would you say it's that your personal experience of being ill, is that what really drew you into the diagnostic space specifically?
Yes, completely. So no, it's a very important point and probably one that absolutely every listener should know. I am not medically qualified. I that was not the path I took. Goodness me, I've got a whole bunch of degrees under my belt, but medical qualification, MD is not one of them. But what I have discovered is that I have a skill set that many in the medical profession do not. So at the end of the day, what you often need, yes, you need a diagnostic test. Yes, you need a diagnosis. Yes, you ultimately need treatment. But sometimes you actually need somebody to do the hand holding through that process. And so a classic example, if a patient, we have many doctors who order direct. So I don't need to be a medical practitioner for the doctors or the clinicians, etc., because they know what they want. For those that don't, and I'll give you an example, we are in the middle, we've got long COVID in blood tests that we test, and we're about to switch on completely differently a new panel for environmental toxins. Fascinating stuff like we're already doing heavy metals, but we're mixing it with glycophosphate and microplastics and so on. Now, there's a lot of doctors and clinicians out there that don't know and understand environmental testing, what they should be looking for, and what if the results come back, what does that mean? What do you then do for treatment? So that becomes an education program. So again, I don't have to be the medical practitioner. What I've got to do is I said to the lab director that we work with, look, I'm noticing a lot of doctors saying that they would like testing for microplastics. They would like testing. There's a doctor in Malaysia we're talking to that would like to test the chemicals that his patients have within their systems from all the chemicals used in Malaysia, presumably from manufacturing, and that ends up in the water stream. So he's the medical professional that goes on the hunt and the research, that finds the testing, that finds out what's out available, that can buy the antigen trays, that can run the testing through the lab if he's already got it. And then we're able to say, we've got this testing now within us. Now, this is because it's a brand new panel. Many, many panels are already, or tests are already within the lab, the labs that we're working with. But the new environmental one, which is, so where's my role in that? My role is I have I've listened like I used to, career-wise, listen to what people are saying. What are they asking for? What's the gap that needs to be filled that will help somebody get better? And then we have created that, and then we're able to offer it to the doctors and then train them. And we're not at a point, because it's brand new, it's literally coming out next month. We're not at a point where patients are actively saying, oh, I hear you've got this test. But that's where we end up with many of the panels that we've got on. So Lyme and tick-borne diseases that we've got within our remit, the viral infections, the long COVIDs, those get regularly asked by patients now because they're familiar. But some of this new stuff, as it comes on board, so again, I don't have to be a medical doctor. I've got to be curious, and I've got to be organized. And it's that kind of approach. And I'm connecting, which has been my career, of connecting people together to make things happen.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we need to make things happen because healthcare as we see it right now, it's in need of a little bit of help. As I've said many other times, as advanced as we think we are, I would say if we were that advanced and we were doing such great work, well, we would see disease and illness rates going down rather than constantly going up. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if you look at most, like you just mentioned there, a lot of advanced testing is simply not available. And
Yeah.
geez, if you go down to your local GP, I mean,
Yeah.
you would think there would be a huge array of availability, and there just isn't. And
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit as well. But from your perspective, what do you think people misunderstand most about lab testing and diagnostics?
Good point. So there's a number of, and actually I would include doctors and practitioners as well, because I think the challenge that any doctor has, and remember that having the name doctor, or even just being a patient. Patients have varying levels of medical understanding. Doctors have varying levels of medical understanding depending on what they specialized in. So at all times, for both groups, doctor and patient, or practitioner and patient, whatever term is best suited to them, each group has a finite knowledge of an area of medicine. So to a patient, they may just know, well, I know I get flu, and I know what COVID is, and I know. Or they may, as we regularly get these days, some incredibly intelligent questions. I had somebody last week email me about the strain of Bartonella called Elizabethae, which is tested in the US but less tested here. And she's a patient, incredibly complex. What about this genus? What does that mean? Do you test it? Are we able to quantify it? So what you're dealing with at all points are varying levels of knowledge. And you've got to, you can't start at the lowest common denominator, because otherwise you risk talking down to a lot of people who say, yeah, I know all this. But you do have to have a base level of understanding. And what are the most common errors that are made with diagnostics in general between practitioner and patient? And it's this, and it was a learning for me as well. Many of us think that when we get a test, whatever the test is, whether we've gone down to our local doctor or whether we've ordered it from a specialist lab like we work with, we think that 100%, whatever the result is, it's the truth. But it's not, because every lab has the wording, which is also becoming more widely known, and I think this is fantastic because it shows a general knowledge in the populace. Of every lab has a degree of sensitivity and specificity, which is how accurate the test is. Every lab is either governed by their own government law. So if they're a government-owned lab or government-approved, there will be government rules. But the UK rules might be different from Germany, might be different from Spain, might be different from Portugal, and are definitely different from the US. So you've got different countries applying different government rules. You then have private labs who don't have to conform to medical rules and law, but don't have to conform to necessarily the government rules because they can get accreditations in a different way. Then you've got the quality of the people within the lab. How qualified are they? Or how much attention to the detail are they conducting the lab? The machines that are being used, because it's usually machine and human combo. The machines that are being used, how modern are they? How good are they? The testing that's being controlled. So if we just think of a standard COVID test or a pregnancy test, when we have those two lines, one is that one we know on the COVID or the pregnancy test is that's the control. The second one is it positive or negative? Or, do you have it or don't you? Are you pregnant or not? Do you have COVID or not? It's the same in a lab. You have to have control cells and you have to have then your testing cells, or wells as they're known within a tray, wells. It varies per lab. Some labs, believe it or not, don't do any control wells. Some labs do 2. The lab we work with does 6. So what do people know, to go back to your question, what do people need to know about what they're doing with what to understand about diagnostics is to understand that no lab is equal and that every test needs to be tested on its merit. And you need to understand the way in which the test was conducted. And you need to understand what kind of test. Was it an antibody? Was it a T cell? Was it a PCR, etc.? Because each one, depending on what the question is, because what's a test? A test is you're asking a question to find out an answer about your body. If you ask the wrong question, you're not going to get the answer you need. And that's that's one of the biggest challenges I've discovered personally, is I now understand it because I've been in the industry this long, 5, 6 years that I've been kind of working alongside medical professionals and learning and understanding how it does. And I come from a statistical analysis, economics, business background. So this kind of logic makes sense to me. But telling a patient when they're sick for the first time, I think I need this test, or why should I have this? I think the challenge that labs have and doctors have is trying to explain to patients which tests they should have and why. And even doctors, particularly in diseases that are less well known or less accepted. Again, I come back to infectious diseases or any of these molds and yeasts and heavy metals that are more the area of functional doctors are looking at, but not mainstream. It's all a matter of, do you understand which lab you're choosing? Do you understand why you're going to them? Do you understand what those results mean? And only then, when the results come out, can you say, okay, I now trust this enough to be able to read a result to give to the patient. And that's a really, so yeah, no test is black and white. And that's the hardest thing to explain to patients.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% in the difference of testing quality in labs. Because blood chemistry is more of a specialty of mine, and people go, well, what's different about your tests? And I'm going,
Yeah,
well, one, I'm testing beyond the standard 15 blood markers that you get, and
that's
apparently you're
right.
supposed to tell everything by the body. But I said
That's
also
right.
the lab that I'm using, because just like you mentioned, uh, labs differ. And I don't use hospital labs because I find a lot of hospitals they're a business in themselves, and diagnostic equipment is extremely expensive. So to keep up with the latest diagnostic equipment and keep it maintained costs quite a lot of money. And
Yeah.
also the personnel that you have, the technicians running it, they might not necessarily be of a certain caliber either.
Right.
So therefore, I'm only using nationally accredited labs that are double or triple certified on an annual basis. And
Yeah.
I've had some patients that didn't believe me. And I said, okay,
Yeah.
well, you're going to put
Yeah.
your money where your mouth is. Let's test it out. So we went
Yeah.
to their medical doctor, and then they came to me for a blood draw same morning. So it shouldn't be really much difference in the bloods. And we got them back. And we did that 3 times with 3 different patients. And um, some of the markers were similar, but there were others that they were way off. Like
Yeah.
there's a night and day difference. And I'm going, oh my goodness. So who's right and who's wrong, right? That's going to be the
Yeah.
question. And I'm going, well,
Yeah.
what if a medical doctor was prescribing medication on results that weren't accurate to begin with? And maybe this is why a lot of people are not getting the results that they need. It could be one potential reason for that. So testing quality, yeah, it's something that I am really, really picky about. And
Yeah.
And this is also why sometimes a certain test may cost a little bit more money as well, because you're paying for that quality. And the technician, even at my clinic, when I take the bloods, I just don't take the bloods and throw them in the corner and wait for the courier to pick them up. And I know a lot of places it's like that. I find
Yes.
out, well, how does the lab want them prepared? What needs to be refrigerated? What needs to be
Yep.
centrifuged? What needs to be frozen so that we can keep those samples at their, their prime state? So, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad you
Yep.
mentioned that, because I don't think
You're
people are
you're
aware of the whole process that
no,
goes behind testing.
no.
Yeah.
And there's even so here's another example, just because you've said about the preparation of the blood. When a blood sample arrives at the lab, you're absolutely right. So taking everything I've just said into account, then the added layer is the blood itself. How has it been transported? Was it transported safely? Because um, uh, some labs will literally open up the blood and just test it. The lab I work with, and so I'm not. This is not a plug. It's just purely sharing my knowledge, so that people can then judge sort of accordingly. Does a testing phase of the blood's viability to be tested before it is tested. So what they're actually doing is having a look at the blood and saying, is there a good enough representative sample of the cells that we want to test, live or other, before we actually put it into testing? And if it isn't, then before it even has its first test, it fails. And so, you can get you have to draw the line somewhere, but what you're always trying to do is almost to go into the law of diminishing returns. How much do we how many checks do we put in place so that we can ensure that we put the very best of the best results out there, but we also aren't making the cost so exorbitantly high that the patient can no longer afford to pay for it, because so much of this is privately paid, obviously. Some insurance companies cover it, but not many around the world. And we also don't want to put the patient through too many, if any at all, rounds of redoing testing. So we avoid at all, because really, it's a patient that's sick and has whatever the sample is, blood, urine, stool, saliva, they don't want to do it again. So we only do it again if we really think that the viability is low. But again, that's important. Whereas I know there are some labs, I've seen emails from patients that say, you're the first time that's ever rejected a sample. What's wrong with your lab? Why has it failed? All the other labs are fine. And actually, it's a flip thing. It's, well, actually, was your sample fine every single
Yeah.
time? And are we the first people to ever question the viability of the sample? So yeah, it's a balance. And it's that word that we always say about anything. It's education. It's just this gentle, step by step, person to person, podcast by podcast education of what is going on in healthcare these days. To your point, because it is changing. Healthcare is
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
changing globally.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now with the functional medicine that's taking more of a foothold, and a lot of
Mm.
allopathic practitioners are getting more into functional medicine. One of the famous sayings is test, don't guess. So taking that into mind, then why is testing such a critical piece of the puzzle for people with chronic or complex health issues?
Uh, because if you've got a chronic condition, whatever that name or label is, chronic means you've had it a long time. And chronic therefore means somebody hasn't given you an answer to get better. Otherwise, you wouldn't be chronic. So why do we encourage testing chronic conditions, whatever they are? It's because you've possibly not asked the right question. Your doctor, and testing with a functional doctor such as yourself or others that we deal with, what that allows is you widen the set of questions that you're asking. If I go, again, I'll just use myself as an example because I have the label chronic. I've had chronic long-term inflammation, always a bad thing to have, but it appears. And if I go to my GP, they would test some inflammatory markers, but all that they're testing is whether their small band of inflammatory markers are showing up or not. And 9 times out of 10, when I've had them done, they say, no, you don't have any inflammatory markers. So first of all, it's getting the right set, as you know, done, but also why, the cause. So a functional doctor like you, what you're doing is you're saying, well, you've got the inflammation, you've got the immune suppression, you've got the symptomatic, list that you've given via a teleappointment, conf call, etc. What we now need to do is find the root cause. And so what that testing, as you are probably finding yourself in the work you're doing, is you're asking questions now about cause. And I think that's the root of the future of healthcare. We have become very used to symptomatic testing, treating for causes or after the horse has bolted him. I've got these symptoms. Okay, here's your diagnosis. But where we're moving to much more is what is the cause? And even better, earlier, what's the prevention? So we're also seeing a lot more this year. So here we are coming into our second year working. We're seeing a lot more dial up of some of the words that we're using are things like biohacking or longevity, but essentially what we're talking about is preventive medicine. So I'm okay right now, but I don't want to get ill. Can we make sure that everything is okay with my systems, whatever they are? Or I had COVID and I recovered, but can we check that my NK cells and everything in terms of my inflammation is under control? So yeah, it's the diagnostics are becoming ever more key for the functional medicine community, because do you know what? I think actually what's happening, I think there's a divergence. So you're right. You're absolutely right. There is an increase in functional medicine, but it's dividing. And the division, I think, and you'll tell me to defer this in a moment because I'm sure we'll get to it, but is AI and the future.
Yeah.
Because actually what's happening is we've got ordinary healthcare, if I can put that label to it, ordinary, functional, you go to your doctor, you've got a cold, you got a cough, you haven't felt well, you need some basic tests, etc. Accessible to all, we hope. Not to everybody, because obviously in some countries they have to pay, like the US. But in theory, the National Healthcare Service in whatever country you're in will help with just your general maintenance. The functional area is where where those of us who are fortunate enough to afford, and we have to be mindful that not everybody can, but those who are fortunate to afford can now start to say, I've got a chronic condition. I've had this for a long time. I got COVID and I never seemed to get better. I've lived with X and Y throughout my life, and I was just told that migraines were normal, or fibromyalgia, I've just got to live with it, or whatever it is, those chronic long-term conditions, IBS, etc. Functional medicine is doing a fantastic job in that it's actually saying, you know what, none of this, your body is meant to heal, your body is designed to heal, let's find the root cause and help it do that job. But where I think the world is dividing is functional medicine is growing, but so too is this standard medical care, which is going to be plugged into AI, because I think that the future, certainly the next 5 years, AI will be unable to do what functional health does. So I think there'll be a massive divergence population and healthcare wise.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would term that as more personalized or maybe humanized medicine, we could call that. And
Yeah.
what we see right now, and I think a lot of medical doctors, I think there should be a concern. And I've heard some people talk about it, oh, our jobs are secure. Then I'm going, well, a lot of insurance companies now have AI nurses and doctors where you just tell them what your symptoms and problems are, and it gives you a prescription. And I was saying this is not much different than going to your standard doctor. Unfortunately, that's all they have time for. You tell them your symptoms, they look it up, and they match a drug with it. So the
Yeah.
AI probably can do that much quicker and faster, and you don't have to wait in line or this or that and the other. So. Um, that's it. But is that really practicing medicine that helps people? So I think you're right. We're going to see a divergence, and those that are doing that personalized, humanized type medicine, I think they'll be kept going. So it's going to be interesting in the next 5 to 10 years to see how it all plays out.
It will, and I think I think one of the challenges is as technology, AI, the advancement of technology, either closed or open, in terms of open source, and any of the closed AI systems, because there are many closed AI systems being built simultaneously as well. What we've also got to remember is it's only as good as the data that goes in. And so accurate data sets are absolutely critical, but so is human intervention. So there's a case study. It's not even a case study; it's sort of happening in China already, where these kind of pods are already there, where you can walk up and plug in your symptoms, etc. But what was interesting was when they got to the end of talking about this case study, they said, but there's still a doctor that reviews it before it's released. And I think that's
Mm,
still key at the moment, because it's only through, and there's still a human that's plugged in, that you can then adjust so that the AI model learns. And I think that this is the concern, is that um, your regular coughs and colds, absolutely. But when you get into complex things where subtle symptoms, one of the things that working with doctors such as yourself now, I get into these lovely conversations where um, somebody will tell me something and they'll say something like, I just had a hunch. I just thought I should test them for this because you know what? I just kind of wondered if that human curiosity is what I believe saves so many lives globally, because
mm,
curiosity at the root is what you need to be a good doctor. And when I say doctor, practitioner, whatever your title is, you need curiosity. The loss of curiosity is in fact where the errors start to occur. And then you get the errors within the healthcare system, and things that aren't diagnosed. And of course, we've all heard those horror stories.
yeah,
Remaining curious almost becomes I don't actually know if it's written into the Hippocratic oath, but that is so key in the stories I hear, because it is that curiosity that prompts that test, coming back to the diagnostic, asking the question, doing the diagnostic test to get the answer.
yeah,
And AI is not trained on that curiosity. It is not. It does not have an evolved, dare we say, brain. It does not have an evolved thinking process that mimics just that, what we call a gut feel. And until that's there, it is absolutely critical that healthcare does have human intervention. And it's interesting because I'm talking with, and I mentioned this offline before we sort of started recording, about some work that I am doing within the AI world, with, not to reassure any listeners any of our data. It's just more the theory of how it would work, coming from my business point of view, but having a look at this as a system that's being implemented digitally, globally. And one of the challenges I put to this individual who's leading this project is, we're back to the same point. Unless you say to the system, this is a good lab result, this is a bad lab test, this had a lot of control wells, this had no control wells, unless you program it to understand, it will see all things as equal. So all replies as equal. And therefore the diagnostic, exactly what you said earlier, a parameter of a test, let's say on inflammatory markers, 5 markers, or blood markers, 5 markers versus 15, you know the difference. But until you program a system to understand that, it won't know that. It will just take, well, that was a positive or negative, or this means such and such. I'll work on 5
yeah,
parameters rather than the gut
y-
feel of, this isn't enough.
yeah, yeah. And then even with the bloods, it's just not the amount of blood markers tested. It's, well, what reference ranges have actually been set? Because I
Yeah.
know in functional medicine,
Yeah.
and functional blood chemistry, we have much different reference ranges than the standard ones. And
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people really understand. My understanding from a lot of blood chemistry labs is that the reference ranges keep changing because
Oh
that's
dear.
based on the general average public. So if you're changing the reference ranges every 3 to 6 months, and that's based on the people that are coming in. So let's say you have 10,000 people coming in, and we're going to take the average of those, and this is your reference range. And this is supposed to be the normal quote unquote, range. And then I always go to people and I'm going, well, how many of those 10,000 people that came in do you think were sick to begin with?
Yeah.
And so are we basing those reference
Is it
ranges
normal?
on people that are not well? And then
Yeah.
we're told that it is well, and and then the famous thing, oh, your blood tests look normal, you should be fine.
Yes, absolutely. There was an interesting talk I heard, so I'm totally cribbing from it, but it said it's absolutely spot on diabetes recently. Because obviously quite frequently a lot on diabetes because of sugar and our health, etc. And I couldn't tell you the ranges where they were 10, 15 years ago in the UK and where they are now. But 10, 15 years ago, somebody who is not diabetic now, who's considered borderline, would have been quite diabetic then. And it's almost exactly that the tolerance level for how much sugar we will accept in our blood as being normal has gone up. So, and probably if we were to rewind into the 1950s, it would be different again because, post-war, there wasn't a lot of sugar and consumption around and so on. So absolutely, what is normal? And again, oh God, that's such a huge question because then and who should state the standard for normal? And what country? And do we all sign up to it as part of some sort of WHO guideline? And then you start getting into sort of governance and debate. It's a very complicated question, and that's the thing with cross-border testing. The testing that we do, and we're dealing with so many patients across borders, they will then say, well, my GP in whatever country, fill in the blank, doesn't understand this or doesn't understand these ranges. And it's because the ranges have been done and we can tick all sorts of boxes in terms of quality and testing, etc., but they won't necessarily make sense to the Spanish, Polish, Portuguese, American, etc. And so then that again, it's an education process, but normal when you're taking a population of probably sick people, because if you're not sick, you probably aren't going to a functional doctor to get tested to say what's wrong with me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Very
Absolutely.
few.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I,
Huge
I
topic.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there's I would say really only 10-20% of people are coming in to make sure that they're keeping healthy, but the
Yeah.
rest of them have usually something going on. But you know, the you mentioned curiosity earlier, and I think this
Yeah.
is really important as doctors and clinicians and practitioners that we keep that going because this is the only way that we advance in better medicine.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really ticked me off going through the COVID time was the science is settled, don't question the science. And I'm like, oh my God, if we do that, we're never going to progress. We're
Yeah.
never going to progress
Yeah.
anywhere. That's how we advance by questioning it. And sometimes we have to admit that maybe we don't know things. And I think some people may have issues with that. They think they know everything. And really, we don't. Nobody knows everything. That's
Yeah.
why I said in the beginning in my opening, I say the truth as I know it and as I learn
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
if you can prove that something I'm saying is wrong, tell me, and I'm willing to change my mind about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing on COVID because um, i- uh, even to this day, researchers are saying that and research it continues, as you know, into COVID and its long-term impact. There is a long-term impact of those who have had COVID and or suffered. So we sort of bunch a whole bunch of people into, oh, I've got long COVID, or there's people out there who are exhausted or get sick all the time or can't get out of bed or whatever it is that's classified as the long COVID symptom that then the healthcare service will say, yes, you've got long COVID. Many of them are not actually getting tested. Do they actually have it, or do they have a reactivation of other illnesses that they maybe had lying dormant that their immune system was coping with? Is it actually long COVID or is it something else? So that's number one that often isn't getting answered for these
Yeah.
patients. But also the long-term studies are showing there has been globally massive systemic impact on our bodies, which we are still looking to understand. And I think that is, I mean, it's tragic, but from a scientific point of view, it's fascinating because I think what is going to come out, and this is where people again, such as yourself, functional doctors, looking, COVID affected the entire system, and I think that was one of it was I can't say it was the first time, but it's one of the few times that we know globally that we can acknowledge as a collective group that we know COVID affected the world and it affected patients in different ways. Whereas there's a lot of diseases out there that we say, well, if you have that, then you have this precise list of symptoms.
Hmm.
Um, and COVID was the first time that we said, do you know what? It's kind of a mimicker of many symptoms, many different things. And some people it affected their organs. That's why they ended up in hospital. Some people just had massive inflammation. Some people just had respiratory, like a really bad cold or flu. It affected everybody differently. But what we've kind of all walked away from it, including myself, and kind of gone back to work. And what we're forgetting is that there's a large population out there that not just have COVID, but have lying dormant this long-term impact. So I think that research coming out will be very interesting in years, because the
Yeah.
doctors I speak to, from oncology through to how it's affected blood, through to how it's affected internal inflammation, there's been huge impact across a number of systems.
Yeah. Sometimes when a patient is being treated for an illness or a disease, they may take a medication and they may have an adverse reaction to that. And
Yeah.
I think, at least I've seen personally in my clinic, a lot of people when going through the COVID times, they believe that they've had an adverse reaction to the vaccine that was given. Some they go, definitely I was fine before and I didn't feel great, or I had the worst experience in my life. Have you come across that with the lab testing? And is there any lab testing that could potentially verify that, hey, yeah, you didn't react well to this medication?
To the medication or to the vaccine?
To the
Because
vaccine,
there's
which that's the
pharmacogenetics.
medication in this case. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so the area of pharmacogenetics, medication, of which one could, I suppose, count vaccine as part of, in its sense of I suppose it is a medication for your immune system. Pharmacogenetics is becoming a huge topic, and in fact, I was at a conference um, in December in Europe, and met a very fascinating lab out there has developed and is using pharmacogenetics with a lot of their oncology patients and that kind of thing. The lab that we're working with is in the process of developing its own pharmacogenetics panel as well, because this is the next step, exactly what you're describing. With regards to vaccine, um, oh, it became so political, didn't it? The
Mm,
anti-vaxxers, and it became, depending on where you were, whether you got goodness, it became literally political in the United States, but even in Europe, affecting people's jobs. I had a friend in Italy who was banned from going to work and threatened with being made redundant if she didn't. And she wasn't an anti-vaxxer; she was just nervous. So I think it's a very tough topic, because let me bring it back to the actual science that I know and understand. And let me
great.
give you an example in terms of training. This year, we are in the process of organizing with the lab that we work with. We're organizing two training sessions. One is very bespoke to a particular clinic, that is very focused on long COVID, and the other is much more generalist. So we're bringing in a whole bunch of doctors from different countries, and the training is going to be around long COVID. Now, bearing in mind the caveat, I will mention again, I am not a medical doctor. I think that's very important, because what I'm going to talk about is the theory. I'm not going to go into the deep science. And if somebody is interested that's listening to this in the deep science, we can connect you. I can connect you, no problem. Um, the lab that we worked with was one of the labs in Germany that was fortunate, I suppose, if that's the right word, to get the contract, or one of the many contracts that was going out at the time of COVID, to do all the COVID swabs. You know, when we were all swabbing our mouths to go to work, to meet friends, to find out if we could travel, all of that. So they got one of these contracts, and they were, because of the size of the lab and their positioning, they did a lot of it. And from that, and the work, the owner of the lab, who his name is Dr. Souza, that we work with, and from that, he was doing a lot of work on that and curious. You know, he's got that curiosity bone, which is good, in his body. He was curious. He works with universities. He lectures. He's a, you know, he's a, yeah, I mean, a fantastic guy and very well qualified in the various things he's done in his life, from medical doctor to lab director now. And he worked in his lab and with research and with a university, and he has developed a couple of COVID panel tests, little blood tests. And what he is looking for, and he's not unusual. There are other people out there doing it, so it's not, he hasn't invented something brand new. But what he's done is he's really focused on it because of this long-term impact that COVID is having on the body. And what he's seeing in other people's bloods because of it. And what he's developed is a panel, and the training we're doing this year is precisely on this, which can tell the difference between, do you have COVID now? So some people literally say, do I have it now? So that's acute. Remember, from a terminology point of view, for your listeners, if they're not aware, that's the acute stage. You know, you've got it and it's there right now. To the chronic or the long term, what we would call long COVID, it's in your system. Because what we actually know is that the virus continues to live. So it isn't just that you've had it, you've got over it, and you've still got the symptoms, so you got long COVID. There's something actively going on. So and that's all to do with NK cell, and silent inflammation, and all of these different measures and parameters. But what he's added in, and I was challenged, I will be honest, I was challenged by a long COVID specialist who said, I haven't done any reading on this. And he's absolutely right. There is not, as yet, not a peer-reviewed paper out there, but this test exists and it's going through this research. And because vaccine switches on your immune system in a different way to the virus, what he is able to do is and we've been testing it, he's able to say to the patient, so he doesn't know about patient's name, you know, we could take your blood and say, okay, we don't know, he doesn't know that it's coming from you, we're just going to test it. And he's able to test at the end of it and say, Dr. Richard Rocker, you had the vaccine. You definitely had the vaccine and you had an adverse reaction to it, or you've got long COVID. So there is technology, and not just developed by him, as I said, we're doing it with him, but there are others around the world who are now able to differentiate between long COVID and, whether you want to call it vaccine injury or vaccine impact, the impact that vaccine has had on your body. And yes, there is a test out there, but it is not well known. Because we haven't been marketing it. We've just been doing it and developing it and using it. And we've got lots of doctors using it. But that this is what I mean. This is what's wonderful, is there is ongoing research into long COVID. Because what I'd love, and it should be the way that healthcare is that it's not static, that we are continuing to develop in all areas of health all the time, from, you know, whether it's multiple sclerosis to diabetes to heart care to cancer to long COVID. We should be continually curious, asking questions and saying, well, what impact did vaccine have? Can we test for it? And if we do, okay, then what do we do about it? And then that becomes the job of the doctor. Like, how do we now actually deal with the inflammation that's showing, or the impact on, and that's where the word immunosenescence is becoming really important. What the impact that long COVID and other similar is having on the imprint it makes on the immune system.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, So yeah, COVID testing was one thing I wanted to talk about, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
The other big test that you deal with is also Lyme disease. So many
Yes.
people have heard of Lyme disease, and I think there might be a bit of confusion around it. So how do you usually explain Lyme and related infections to somebody that's maybe new to the topic?
Um, the best way, there are so many terms even within the industry, you're right. So the commonly use word is Lyme. In the US and Canada, people tend to talk about Lymes, as adding an S on it. People will talk about it being tick-borne diseases. They will talk about it being TBDs. Here is my quick rundown for you. And this is the topic that up until now I've just indicated I got sick. I actually got Lyme. So I'm speaking from a place of personal experience, not just book knowledge, and training. Okay. Lyme is known as Borrelia in its formal term. It was called Lyme because it was originally found or discovered in Lyme, Massachusetts in the US. And the way to think about it is that Borrelia is and I'm not going to go into what each one is, but it's a bacteria. And you get it from most commonly a tick, but actually what we know as vector-borne vector-borne infections. Now, what does vector-borne mean? It means anything that bites you. So a flea, a sandfly, a tick, a mosquito, all of the things that can bite you have the possibility of passing Lyme to you if they were already infected. Now, how do they get infected? They get infected because before they've bitten you, they've bitten another animal or bird that has got Lyme. So what happens? It's like a food chain. The Lyme, the tick or the mosquito or the sandfly or whatever, they're infected. They get infected because they've bitten small birds or little animals. Certainly in the UK, it would be mice, it would be hedgehogs, rodents. In North America, it'd be things like gophers and, just small animals. And then it works its way up in its life cycle and ends up biting a human if you're unlucky enough. But what you need to think is the Borrelia is one of, and I will probably quote this number slightly incorrectly. I'm doing it from memory, but it's something between about 9 and 15 infections that you can get. That might be slightly on the high. Let's say it's an average of 10. So let's say you get an average of about 10 infections. So we all think, oh, I've got Lyme. I think I've got Lyme. And that was where I started. I think I might have Lyme. It looks like I've got all the symptoms. But actually, whatever you got bitten by, which in my case was a tick, we actually saw it on me. Whatever you got bitten by, what you don't know is all the animals that bit before you, it's also got everything that those animals had and it's passing on to you. So you end up really with, it's a really vile idea, but it is the truth. You end up with a soup of infections that you get, which is just as vile as it sounds. And what happens is there is the possibility that you can react to it and get what we call an erythema migrans or a bullseye ring, or basically a ring rash like a big mosquito bite. But that is a very low percentage. And whether or not you get that ring rash, etc., if you've been bitten, you will get a popular combination of what we call 3 Bs, Borrelia, Bartonella, and Babesia. Babesia is actually a parasite. Bartonella and Borrelia are bacteria. And then you can get other things as well. And the way I've described it, now remember the analogy for you and viewers, this is my analogy that I give to people because I've been asked by patients a lot about this, and even friends. When I was trying to explain to friends what I'd got, it was like, oh gosh, where do you start? So it's very important to note that I'm about to compare it to AIDS, and it is not AIDS at all. But in the same way, this is the way I was able to understand it even for myself. Because what happened was my immune system crashed and I got sick all the time. And every parameter about my function went down, my cognitive ability, like long COVID. So I had brain fog. I couldn't move. I had random fevers. I had random rashes. I didn't feel well. The list was endless. And headaches and you name it, nausea, loss of weight. And what it is that fundamentally the Borrelia enters your system and does a really good job, like AIDS does, of just smashing your immune system down. And when your immune system's rock bottom, all the other stuff that either was bitten, that came with the tick, that muddy soup that you got, or just going out into your neighborhood and meeting your friends and picking up those bugs, your immune system is suppressed and you get everything that's coming. So what a Lyme patient suffers from by the time they get tested, by the time they have been through multiple doctors in order to finally have somebody, either they've done the research themselves or somebody such as yourself might go, you know what, this sounds a lot like Lyme. What you're meaning when you say it sounds a lot like Lyme is it sounds like you've got a group of infections probably triggered by the Lyme Borrelia. We should test for them. So what happens is then you do a test. Now, our test, and we're not the only one, but you've got to be careful, is if you just test for Lyme Borrelia and you don't do the right test and your immune system is already rock bottom, the common test is the antibody test, and it will show as a false negative. So it will show you don't have Lyme, even though you tested for it, because your immune system is so suppressed, it's not showing up green lights to say, yeah, I'm sick with it. And the other problem with only doing a Lyme test, which is a common thing done in the UK, and not just the UK, France does the same thing, Portugal, Spain, lots of Europe, when they test for Lyme, they test for Borrelia. They're also not scanning the horizon and looking for everything else. Because quite often the presenting symptoms, although Borrelia was the first cause and needs treating, quite often the presenting symptoms are a series of other infections and health conditions that have come as a result of that body being sick for so long. So what we've done is, and any good lab should do this, is develop a panel of the most common tick-borne diseases, vector-borne diseases, as well as some common infections from the community. And that's the panel, because then you're basically saying, I'm going to take a snapshot of the body rather than I'm only looking for Borrelia. So that's how I would explain Lyme. That's how, in a very quick as I can make it. I think the thing that we hear, and I see it on social media because I've had Lyme, so I've followed social media channels when I was trying to learn it, is it's such a sad story for patients within this group of tick-borne diseases. And I mentioned earlier mosquitoes. So some people will say, I never was bitten by a tick, or I don't remember being bitten by a tick. But then you get the story and you hear that they lived in Africa for a while, or they lived in Thailand, where there's a high endemic region of mosquitoes that can carry it. So in the same way that we saw COVID evolve, and we saw COVID go, what was it? It started with the Delta strain, then it went to Omega, then it went, and so it went on. And there's multiple strains now. So too does Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia have different strains. And so it's understanding what those strains are, what the common ones are for the region. We have got very common ones in Europe that we test for all the time. But a doctor recently said, do you know what? I'm expanding a lot of my business into Africa. What are the strains in Africa? We had them, but we just hadn't switched them online for this particular doctor. So we now have an African panel. We've now got a North American panel. And so it's very important. I've lived in Canada. I've lived traveled around the world. I've done the classic backpacking thing. I've been bitten all over, India, Thailand. I've come home with all of the markings of somebody well-traveled. Who knows where I picked up some of these infections? And it was probably the tick bite that I got in 2019 that knocked me over, but I might have had a lot of these infections dormant for years. And that's where you get the chronic state. And that's where, coming back full circle to integrative health, why when somebody just doesn't feel well, they might not even have the label yet of you've got a chronic condition. They just feel like they're always tired, or they're always unwell, or they've always got these symptoms. The chances are, especially if they've traveled, especially if they're outdoorsy, which most of us, if we've lived a good life, we've had the opportunity of doing that, you've probably accrued a nice number of infections alongside that. And sometimes you can live your entire life like that and you don't get sick. And sometimes, and that's a whole other discussion on DNA and genetics and stress factors and a whole bunch of other things, sometimes that one bite or that one infection tips you over the edge and your health falls over.
Yeah, yeah. I like to call it the load point. Once you go over that load point
Yeah.
of all the things that affect us in a negative way, that can tip you over.
Yeah,
So
perfect. A load point. Yeah.
yeah. And then, so yeah, we see loads of people that tired, and chronic fatigue seems to be the number one complaint with many people. So, and I've heard that there are estimates of up to even like 1.3, 1.4 billion people are potentially infected
Yeah.
with Lyme or some kind of co-infection with that. So
Yeah.
it's a lot more prominent than we believe. Now, when we go down to your local doctor and you get the standard Lyme testing, what makes that not as good, or maybe not as accurate as compared to the advanced testing that you're doing? So for the layperson, what's the difference there? Because they may not understand, well, what makes your test so special?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, uh, so again, I caveat, I've got huge respect for anybody who works in healthcare and the government systems that do support us in terms of health, do a phenomenal job, but they can't do everything. And they have, and again, taking the UK NHS as a classic example here, but the same exists in Canada. I've read some news recently regarding Germany that they've got the same. One of the big challenges that any national healthcare system has constantly is economics. You mentioned the word earlier that hospitals have to run like a business. They do, because they get funding. They get funding from the government, and they have to run a budget. And when you do that, they have to sit around boardroom tables and make decisions. And the decisions they have to make are, what machinery are we going to invest in this year? What clinicians are we going to have on board? How experienced are they going to be? All the things that we've been talking about earlier in this conversation. But the other thing that they take on board is, what tests are we going to do for the various diseases? What scans? What process? What triage system are we going to have for patients when they present themselves with certain symptoms? And the it's a no-brainer that you would, and I think we would all agree, even listening to this, that we would want every healthcare system to prioritize the largest majority of people that are sick. So if cancer takes up a lot of resource and time, because more and more people are getting cancer, I don't think any of us would say we shouldn't be investing in that area, and we shouldn't be adequately staffing it, and we shouldn't have the right tests and equipment and treatment. And then you add in heart disease, and then you add in diabetes, and then you add in, and the list goes on. And you start to go down in terms of how many people in a nation's population have a certain amount of disease. And you get down to then the rarer things. And we've all heard it, these random diseases and infections, and charities that are set up to raise money because there's not enough research going into that area. Well, why isn't there
Mhm.
enough research going into that area? Because the reality is, whether we like it or not, somebody at some point had to draw a line and say, we've run out of money, we've run out of budget. We can't research that as well. And Lyme falls into that category. Although you're right, and I'll come back to the numbers globally in a moment, but the numbers that are reported and the numbers that are confirmed to be positive fall into a category where, and I'm only going to speak for the UK, but UK is representative globally. But I will keep speaking about the UK example because you can extrapolate, is that the numbers fall to such a low degree that they say, you know what, Lyme exists, but it's a small proportion. So we've got some testing. We know it shows positive sometimes, and I'll explain why it doesn't. We know it shows positive, but we're not going to invest in it because, you know what? Look over here. We got a whole population of long COVID people now that we haven't dealt with, and cancer is still on the rise. And gosh, now people are trying to lose weight, and we've now got Ozempic, but Ozempic's causing its own problems. So you've just got this continual cycle of health issues that get boosted in priority. Now, Lyme, the test in the UK for a number of decades, and it does get revisited. That's where I've got to, as I said, respect what the NHS and the authorities are trying to do. But what the UK does is, it does as a standard within, if I went into my GP, and I did, do I have Lyme? They tested me, and it was an antibody test. And it was an antibody test, the likes of which the United States and Canada and Germany did decades ago. They don't do it now. that's not their accepted test, because what they've done is they invested and pushed testing forward. So what you're getting is you're getting different countries doing different testing based on the priority that they deem that test or that disease to be. And in the UK, just because of data and numbers and budgets, Lyme is at a level where they say the antibody test is sufficient. Now, we know from research out of the Johns Hopkins University in the US, and we know out of the results that come out of Germany, and we know out of multiple labs in Germany, not just the one I work with, and other labs, that there are better tests out there. So why aren't we doing it here in the UK? Why aren't other countries? Because it does come down to money. And if you think about what's got to happen, if we said tomorrow to the NHS, right, you know what, your test isn't good enough anymore, this is a better test, whatever that test is that we say, to accept it within the UK or any government, they have to test it themselves. They have to test it themselves. So they'd have to put a working group together and a research group. They would have to test it internally. You wouldn't just blindside take research from another country and say, yes, we are now going to adopt this for all our people in our country, and this is going to be the test to go for. It would be great if we could have that, because gosh, wouldn't that save time and money? But we don't. What we do instead is we say, no, for our nation, we're going to protect our citizens, which in itself is correct. But therefore, by saying that statement, what we're saying is we're not going to accept another test from the country and deem it with a UK government stamp until we've tested it and we deem it to be the quality that we want. That's a huge investment of time and money. And at this point in time, we only have to look at the headlines to know what's going on in the NHS to know that that's not going to happen. Now, the reason in the difference in tests, to actually get to the point of why they're different, if you test antibodies in a chronically ill patient, not just Lyme, they could have chronic fatigue syndrome, they could have long COVID. If you test, their immune system will be suppressed to the point that they no longer produce the antibodies and show them up. So it just won't show up, you know? So what you've got to do is you've got to ask the body a different question. You've got to go hunting elsewhere in the body for different evidence. And there are many different ways, many different tests that are out there, but the one that we stand behind, and I say we, it is doctors that stand behind it. You know, this is where I feel privileged that I almost don't, I'm not biased because I'm not a doctor. I'm saying, well, these doctors are using it, is they use a T-cell I-spot. Now, there are different methods, but what the T-cell I-spot does is instead of saying antibodies, did you create some immunity and are you going to show up now if I test you? What it's saying is we're going to assume that your body and your immune system are low. And actually, we'll do some immune system testing alongside it to prove that. So we'll test your immune system. Yep, it is suppressed. And at the same time, we're now going to look at your white blood cells, your T cells in your white blood cells, and we're going to test them to see if there's cytokine, there's inflammation count. And what you do is you take each strain. Remember, we were going back to Lyme, and I said there was Borrelia, there's Bartonella, there's Babesia, there's co-infections like Epstein-Barr virus, the EBV, there's loads of them. And you can buy from companies. This is what all labs do, not just us. You buy the antigen trays, which are the trays that allow that particular bacteria to show up. And you pull out the tray and you test for the T-cell cytokine reaction. So you're basically saying, I believe your body is infected with whatever tray it is, Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, etc. And I'm going to put a drop of your blood in each of them. And if it shows up as that inflammation cytokine, I'm actually able to physically count, it's actually counted by people and machine, how many cells are showing that inflammation or showing those markers, inflammatory markers. And from that, I can extrapolate that out of that much blood, and your body is this, you therefore have a high or a low range of infection. And you can then say against 10 diseases or 20, whichever ones you're testing for, which range, what's really special about this T-cell testing is instead of just saying, yes, no, you're positive, you're not, we can say, yes, you're positive to this degree. And what that allows a functional doctor like you to do is say, do you know what? we were talking about you having Lyme, and you do, but you know what? That's not your biggest problem. All your symptoms are coming actually from these infections, which are just roaring through your body. Let's start with a treatment program for that and tackle the Lyme alongside it. But so what happens is the treatment programs, the diagnosis becomes a lot more precise, but also the treatment programs the doctors are able to create become more precise because they know exactly what's going on. It's not just a yes-no on-off switch. So that's effectively a very long answer, but to explain the difference and what happens within testing around the world.
Great. That was a beautiful explanation. Thank you. I think that's going to clarify a lot for people. Um, yeah, that's great. So, okay. So now, once they get the test results back, what do you see as the biggest challenge for the clinician and also the patient?
When they get the test results back,
Yeah.
any test result.
Would it
So,
come
but
to
I can't
how to
lie.
deal
I
how to
can't.
deal with the
Yeah,
results with that problem? Yeah.
yeah. So the first thing that any clinician uh or patient has with any test result is, yeah, what does it mean? If you have a doctor, so if you're the patient and you're going to a doctor and they've ordered the labs, like let's take you for an example. The
Mm,
labs that you're using, you just cited earlier, you know which labs you want to use. And this is a common story we find with doctors. Most doctors, most clinicians have labs that they use that they prefer. Why do they prefer them? It's not for, the usual reason why clinicians stick with a particular lab is they become familiar with that laboratory, and that's essential. It's really important that the doctor you're with knows the lab that they're ordering the tests from so that they understand all the things you and I've talked about today, which is from ranges to what's in it, to the parameters, to even the quality, everything we've talked about, the quality and the standards that they hold themselves to. So if you're on the patient side answering that question, you would get your tests done. Even if you ordered them directly from a lab like us, you would take them to a doctor that knows or to your doctor that's recommended them, and you'd get them analyzed. The challenge for doctors when they're picking labs. So this is how, if you think, I've said already, I've been around a couple of years. The lab I work with has been around 20 plus years. So, I'm new, he's not. Um, how do I get new people on board? Like, how would I get a new doctor like you? Well, what it would be is if you have a series of labs that you're using already and you're happy with, then why change? Absolutely, why change? Don't change. In fact, my recommendation is don't change if you're getting all the results you need. What we tend to scoop up, where we tend to start helping doctors and clinicians is where they're curious, they're wanting answers from labs and they're not getting the depth of understanding or the width, the breadth of testing, so the breadth of parameters or the depth of analysis, or even sometimes a certainty that the quality is what they're looking for. And at that point, that's when
mm,
they go hunting. So the classic thing at conferences and exhibitions and where I meet people and people I talk to is quite often they'll say, I'll give you an example. There's a doctor I'm talking to in Portugal at the moment. Um, he is an integrative health medical person, medical doctor, has his own clinic, doing really well. But what he said is, you know what? I cannot find a good test to what I'm looking for with mitochondrial and oxidative stress. What have you got? And also, he said, I'm also really interested in this environmental toxins of glycophosphate and microplastics. So what the people that we start to work with is those that start to have those questions. And then what happens is invariably, if we do the right job and if the tests are what they're looking for, is that they say, you know what, I came to you just for oxidative stress and mitochondrial testing, but actually wound in with that is the whole hormone pathway, and stress pathway. What have you got? And so then starts to expand. And I think really my learning is coming at this as a layman into this industry. I think that's really how it works, because so much you guys as doctors get trained in a field. You develop a specialism, most of you, unless you're a generalist GP, in which case that's sort of just an ongoing challenge because you're trying to cross everything all the time. But if you specialize, you specialize in an area you're interested in, and you tend to research that, and then you tend to find the tests that suit you and you become comfortable with, because A, you can read them, and B, you trust them. So why move? And well, that's the interesting question, as I've realized, is sometimes you can't move, and that's not my job. My job is not to say go leave one job, leave one lab and go to another. No, this is where I'm still the human and the patient, which is I remember my personal experience. I wanted to go to a doctor that knew the labs, that knew the tests, that could interpret and tell me what's wrong with me. So ultimately, coming back to where I fit in all of this is I fit by saying, which bit don't you have as a doctor that you'd like to answered? Or as a patient, have you reached a dead end? Not because your doctor's doing a bad job, but just they don't know where to go next. Can we help? And that's where we come into our own in terms of the space. It's coming back to what I said originally. We exist in the space where people fall between. If
Yeah.
people aren't falling, then we don't need to help them. So, yeah, that's the job that we're doing. And then the lab, is doing the job that it does, not just with me, by the way. It works, with a lot of German clinics and hospitals in Germany. So they are a government approved private lab.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. So we said that medicine is rapidly changing,
Sure.
and the next 5, 10 years are going to be very interesting. So, from your perspective and in your specialty, where do you see diagnostics heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
Um, I think it's very geographic specific. I think Europe is going to be different to the US. Goodness knows
Mhm.
what's going on with the US. I think the US is just one for all of us to watch, from healthcare to politics to where all the spaces in between. So the US is a question mark, but the US is interesting in diagnostics because it's leading with AI and Europe isn't. And that's because of the investment and infrastructure and the access to power. So we can't dismiss the US at all in terms of diagnostics. So where's it going? Diagnostics in the next 5 years. Geographic specific, I think Europe is relatively united. Every country has got its own healthcare system and its own diagnostics. You only need to talk to your colleagues in the UK and they'll say, we work with these labs, these ones are approved in whatever the jurisdiction they are that live in. But I think what's becoming interesting is that, and I think COVID, we'd always talk about COVID before life, life before COVID and life after. I think one of the big changes that's happened is COVID changed our approach to functional medicine as a population. I think, dare I say, Richard, that functional medicine was on the sidelines more. That was there if you were interested in it, but was a little bit um the 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 area of medicine that didn't receive probably enough credit. And I think what's happened is those of you in this space before and after COVID have been able to prove that it was such a transformational illness, COVID, that often it was only doctors like you that have managed to get patients well again. And so where have diagnostics played into that, and where are we going over the next 5 years? I think that with that recognition of your space, I think comes the recognition that there is not a go to your general GP, get a basic test, find out what's wrong, and it's all done. I think there is a realization to all of us general laymen, general citizens in each country, that there is more to healthcare than just your local doctor down the street or in the village. And that has meant
Yeah.
that more questions are asked about it. the more questions challenges the labs more. So I think labs have got more on their toes about, oh, actually, we're getting asked more questions. The lab I'm talking to, that I work with, was only working with German patients until we came along. And they've seen a marked, what's interesting, since working with us over the last 2 years, he has said, we have so many German doctors coming to us asking for more. Now, that isn't because we're promoting him and suddenly the German doctors are saying, well, Bronia's business is asking for it, so we should. No, I think there's a general gaining of knowledge within Europe. And I think that Europe is on a steady increase to diagnostics. I think the US is going to be much more divided more quickly between functional medicine and AI. And that's because of the conversations I'm having with this guy. He is actually in California, in Silicon Valley, working on an AI model and talking about the investment that's going into healthcare in the US. So whilst I'm not at the forefront, I feel relatively well informed about what the future is at the moment. Canada's interesting. Canada follows a European model. Canada's got a prime minister. We all know Mark Carney from recent Davos conversations. They follow a very NHS style healthcare in Canada, and they are becoming much more diagnostic led as well. So what's the future? It's a division. And actually, do you know what? As I hear myself say this, I think this is the state of the world. It is a much more divided world. I think we are getting into more extremes. And in some cases, those extremes are negative. And in some cases, they are positive. The extremes within healthcare is, I think, that the middle space of healthcare, due to the bottom falling out of the market from a financial point of view, many countries cannot sustain it. You either are going to have to go with the mainstream model, or people are opting, if you're middle to upper and you can afford a little bit extra, it's pushing diagnostics. And the more people that keep pushing into it, the more investment there is, and the more that bespoke panels and tests will be created.
Yeah, I agree. I think we are looking at a divide coming up, and yeah, AI does play into that. And I think the difference is going to be more AI driven medical care. So now when you go to your insurance company, you can see the AI nurse or the AI doctor versus
Yeah.
more personalized immune based testing models, personalized medicine. I think that's going to be the difference. And like you said, money probably will come into it. Unfortunately, those to take advantage of that, you're going to have to pay for that, at least until it becomes a little bit more mainstream, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think,
growing pains, I suppose.
yeah. And I think just an addendum to the point we've been talking about, it comes back to us as a consumer becoming more informed. And, whether we're wearing smartwatches or Ouro rings, or not to name brands, but, the more that we're wearing these smart health devices and the more that we're collecting data about ourselves, this awareness of the steps I've done per day, my heart rate, for women, watches can capture their female cycle. For it can log cholesterol levels, it can log the latest data of, you can plug all sorts of stuff into this. And so we are managing at an individual level now almost our own healthcare. There's flaws in the system, but if you think about where we were 10 years ago, how many of us were walking around with smart health watches that were capturing that? And these systems that are feeding data into, I think that they're giving us knowledge, but they're also giving big business knowledge. And so that is then going to answer the demand. So going back to your question about norms, what's interesting is the more people wear these devices and the more that testing is done generally, then ranges won't equalize in all areas for sure. But I think you will get more of a normalization because people are testing. There's these devices now where you can just, as you know, and I can't remember, you might know the name of it, where you put it on and you can just test your blood glucose that day as you eat, and monitor that cycle into your app. So all of these blood glucose monitorings, well, that's going to help provide more normal ranges so that we aren't all reading diabetic parameters. Yeah, it's big data, individual lifestyle, IT, and it's combining into there's a negative, but the positive, which I'd prefer to take out of it, the positive is I think we can end up with better access to diagnostics, treatment, and healthcare and preventative medicine, should we so choose, and should we, most importantly, should we so be able to afford? Because I think we've got to acknowledge that there's a big core of a population that what the topics we're talking about today are just out of their economic reach, which is very unfortunate and in itself needs addressing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, if there's one message you'd want both patients and clinicians to take away from this conversation, what would that be?
Um, I think that there's one thing, but that is in two parts. One is the stay curious, but and this goes for the
Mm.
patient too. We
Yeah,
all hear the messages about, oh, if you've got signs and symptoms, make sure you go to your doctor. And yeah, absolutely, that's 1000% true. Um, but the curiosity about your health isn't just about waiting for the symptom to happen. It's just about observation. All of us every day in whatever life we're living are under some form of stress or some form of illness, exposure, etc. And if we maintain awareness, I think that when we then feel unwell, without it becoming then that we become anxious about it, so not to develop anxiety, but just a healthy curiosity towards your own health to help. It's not just about how long you live, as we used to talk about, but how well you live, how long those years are, how healthy you are, that lifespan. And so we all would like to think that we're that 80, 90-year-old that's still able to walk around the block and, be independent and so on. And so being curious about your own health, and being curious as a medical doctor about the health of your patients. So the curiosity, and then wound into that, because it's part of curiosity, but maintaining an open mind about where the future of health is going. Because for every person I talk to about AI and the future of health, there's another person that says, I'm not getting involved in that. That's not me. I'm not going to do AI. I'm not going to accept it. And there is a little bit of, absolutely, there will be a choice, as there should be. But there is a part where you remember the days when we used to say, and we did used to say this. Yeah, I remember this. I'll take my camera or I'll take my digital camera. And you meant my old camera when I had a film reel, or a digital camera because that was the new thing. And then now we don't even talk about it. It's just the camera. In fact, it's not even the camera; it's the phone, because that's it. So what happens invariably with technology is, without meaning to, one day we've got to use the tech, or it's part of life. And I think curiosity about your own health, curiosity about your patient's health, and an eye on the horizon to the future, because it's with that curiosity and eye on the horizon that you will end up being able to stay abreast of your health and that of your patients, rather than feeling you're two steps behind.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Fantastic. So Bronia, where can people learn more about your work or find reliable information about advanced testing?
So if you're interested in anything or all that I've talked about today, which, first of all, thank you if you are, if you'd like to have a discussion about anything from testing to, if you've been a patient listening and you think that the experience has been similar to what I've gone through, or to even my past, which is still relevant today, business, marketing, comms, etc., you can reach me on, if you go to the website, which is www.glxg.com. So it's glxg.com is the acronym for Global Lab Expert Group. On there is a contact form. And if you submit on there that you listened to me and you'd be interested in talking to me or asking me a question, I am literally, we are a small team based in a number of countries, but at the moment we are still small enough, despite being global, to that I answer emails personally when people contact me, and long may that continue. So we service most countries around the world. If people are listening to you internationally, couple of countries that we aren't at the moment, just because we're working out the logistics. But yes, wherever you are in the world, wherever you've listened to me today, absolutely would love to hear feedback from you and answer any questions you have. Thank you. It's been great
Great,
speaking to
great. Yeah, and we'll put the details in the show
you. Yeah,
notes for people as well, so they can
for
see
sure.
that. So, pardon me. So before we wrap up, I want to
Yeah.
thank Bronia Thomas for joining me today and for such a open and thoughtful conversation. What really stands out to me clearly today is something we come back to often on the integrative continuum, that health, performance, longevity don't exist in isolation. They sit at the intersection of data, leadership, systems, and personal responsibility and lived experience.
Mm.
So, Bronia's journey from global brand strategy to building an international diagnostics network reminds us that meaningful change happens when we're willing to question existing systems and create better pathways forward. And as always, my intention here is not to tell you what to think, but to invite you to think more integratively, taking what resonates, questioning what doesn't, and continuing to learn the science and our understanding evolved. So thank you for listening. And if this conversation was helpful, consider sharing it with someone who might find it benefit. And until next time, take care of your health. And we'll see you on the next show. Thank you again, Bronia, and thank you to our listeners.
Thank you, and you're more than welcome.
Thank you for joining me on the Integrative Continuum. I hope today's conversation gave you new insights and practical tools for your own health journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with someone who would benefit, and leave us a review. It helps us spread this message further. Until next time, I'm Dr. Richard Rocker. Stay curious, stay empowered, and keep moving forward on your path to integrative health.